All right. Well, we will get started. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it on over to Roderick Bly of Fabricator's Choice. And he's going to walk us through managing consigned inventory in Action Flow. Thank you, Roderick.
Thank you. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the best way to manage consignment inventory. We have developed this quite some time ago, and recently we've perfected it. So if you already have consignment inventory set up, you may want to take some notes and review your current process and see what's changed and if there's a better way to do this. So let's go here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Bring up my presentation here. Okay, let me know when you see it there.
Yep,
I see it.
Great.
Okay. So we're going to start off with some basic things that we want to cover here. And that is, we're going to look at what we call assumptions. When would you use consignment? And what are some of the basic rulings of when consignment is applicable and when it's not? We're going to talk about serialized versus non-serialized, how to configure this, set it up so that you're ready for consignment inventory. Talk about the purchasing, receiving process, and then also visibility, how you can see your inventory, which is a combination of using the fabrication module as well as reports. And finally, when you have used the inventory, the steps that you go through to pay for it. And then we're going to look at some exceptions, things that happen or might happen that impacts consignment inventory. So let's take a look at that here. We'll look at assumptions first. Consignment means you're not going to pay for the inventory until it has been used in action flow. So the status of used has to be the initial status that will trigger this. Consignment inventory can only work with serialized inventory. So if you have non-serialized inventory and you are going to bring in some consignment syncs, you'll have to get your administrator to set up a new class designated as serialized, and then go ahead and set those items up that you're going to consign. The purchase order on a purchase order by purchase order basis should only contain consignment inventory, so do not mix it with your stock or non-stock inventory. Kind of keep a purchase order isolated for consignment inventory. You'll see in a bit here, we're going to add a custom checkbox in the inventory PO configuration. This just helps us with some of our grid view reporting. Again, it's optional, not mandatory. Payment terms. Each vendor typically has unique terms as to when you're required to pay for the consignment inventory. Maybe you have a contract that says, hey, when you're down to the last 2 slabs, you've got to pay for those, regardless if you use them or not. So there's all different types of contracts you'll have with your vendors. Again, you're going to pay for your slabs on a slab by slab, or in this case, sync by sync if it's serialized, when the status changes to used. I just want to also note that although the documentation and the interface speaks highly to slabs, also keep in mind that you can have anything that you wish to consign in your database. Just keep in mind that the system calls it a slab, but you may think of it as a sync, or it may be a sync. Okay, how do we set up this process? So here's a screen capture, and I'm sure those who are administrators will recognize this. This is a little portion of the inventory PO standard. So you don't have to create a unique process for this. You can integrate the consignment component into your standard process. And we will ask you to add a new action called consignment invoice entry. And you'll see it as we go through the presentation here. This is the a unique action that we're going to use when we're processing a vendor invoice. But you'll notice in the standard receive inventory section, we have 2 decisions, those listed at the bottom, where you have consigned, you fully received your inventory, or you've partially received it. And again, partial receiving is no different than partial receiving of your stock inventory. You're basically going to wait for the balance to come in, and then you'll process it through. And ultimately, when you're done, you're going to conceive your inventory in its full fulfillment. And at that point, you're just going to stop, because the payment portion of it or exporting, for instance, to your QuickBooks system or whatever else you're doing, really has to wait until your material is consumed and used. So let's look into that. One thing you want to do on the receive inventory decisions here, you'll see you've got full, partial, and then consigned. Make sure that your statuses are correctly configured for each one of those decisions. The one that's important is the consigned fully received. By setting it to a consigned status, then it'll auto manage the purchase order as well as the line items within that purchase order. So go ahead and configure your decisions in this manner. Okay, to create a purchase order, no different than any other PO, you're going to add a vendor, add your class and colors, define the cost per square foot as per your consignment agreement. Again, we need to have a reasonable cost in the system. We don't want to have a major adjustment when the invoice comes in from the vendor at the end. We want to be relatively close to what we believe the square foot cost is for those materials. Define your slab sizes and update the portions of the purchase order and select the consignment checkbox. So that consignment checkbox is that little checkbox that you're going to see inside your section of the, sorry? Did I miss something there, guys?
I think you're good. Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked earlier about setting up a custom configuration in the inventory PO section for a consignment, and then use your checkbox as a configuration there. That will just make it easier for later on if we're looking in our grid view to be able to find them based upon that checkbox. To receive your purchase order, it's really no different than a traditional purchase order. First thing we want to do is verify the slab sizes as per the packing slip. Add your lot number, and it's very important that you add the vendor's serial number into the vendor item ID. This will help you cross what the vendor sent you, what you have in your system under your action flow item number or serial number. That's the cross-reference between the two. And here's where you're going to pick one of the decisions and receive inventory, where you're going to either select consigned fully received, or you're going to say partially received. When your partial shipment comes in and your order's fulfilled now, you would then select consigned fully received, and it'll set the inventory status and the PO and the lines as well to consigned. The only thing that is really important on the partial received is that you'll need to go to the individual serial numbers that you just received and manually set the status of those line items to consigned, because the system wouldn't know which ones you just received versus the ones you haven't received yet. So again, just manually set those. When you've received your inventory now, within the fabrication tab, as your team is adding and tagging inventory, you'll be able to see the status of those inventory items, not only in the drop down, which is the lower section of the screen capture, where you're going to tag and search those serial numbers and tag them, but also once they're tagged, you'll also see that same status in the fabrication module. So that tells you that you've selected consigned inventory. Very helpful if your policy is not to grab consigned inventory until your stock inventory is used, or maybe you haven't got any more full slice slabs, all you have is remnants. So most companies will defer using consigned unless absolutely necessary. Here's that checkbox we referred to, and here's a report, if you will, using grid view. So here we're looking at this consignment checkbox. Again, very easy if we want to use that as our criteria to find them. But here I can quickly search for my inventory using grid view. I can also use grid view, back up a second, apologies. We're looking at the record type is inventory PO here. I'm sorry, inventory PO. So this allows us to look at our purchase order. If we're looking at our lines themselves, we would select in grid view record type equals inventory item, and then simply set the status to consigned, and it will give us a long list of all the inventory that has the status of consigned. So this will be one way to look at your inventory that is consigned. The second way to see the same thing is you can go to the report module within the inventory PO. So I've given you a path here, inventory PO, click the task icon, go to reports. If your reports are categorized, you'll go to the category of inventory. If they're not categorized, you simply select consigned slabs. And here you can see, and this should match what you have in this list here. There should be really no difference between the two. You're just approaching them differently. You may have restrictions on reports that don't allow certain users to see it. So grid view is kind of a nice way to let someone see what consignment inventory you have without having access to the reports themselves. So here you can see on this particular report, you can see that the status of one of them is used. This would then also be the same serial number that would be on the next report, which is, hey, I'm ready to be paid for. So in this case here, you'll see the serial number that was over here, 206-436. You'll also see that same serial number in the next section, 206-436. And this report groups everything that needs to be paid for by vendor. So if this report is multiple pages, it's 3 or 4 pages long, you can go from one page to the next and see exactly which vendor you have, where you have material that has been used or installed. Those are the two statuses. And then start preparing to pay for those. Some people will actually send the list to their vendors. Other people will simply inform them that they've used these slabs and ask the vendors to supply them an invoice. So we also always want to have an invoice from the vendor so that we can process those invoices correctly. So here we go. We're about to pay now our vendor for the inventory, but remember, we could have a dozen slabs or items on a purchase order, but we've only consumed 3 this month. So if that's the case, I need to just selectively select those 3 from my list, and now I'm going to go ahead and pay for them. So we're going to manually select the inventory items, and then we're going to, if there's remnants there, make sure you don't select those because we're not paying for the remnants. The remnants are ours. We're just going to pay for the original slabs. And then under the inventory PO tasks menu itself, you're going to select allocate selected, and this will open an inventory entry dialog box. So anybody who's already processed invoices for a vendor, this is the exact same steps that we're doing here, nothing different. The only thing that we're doing different now is on this last step here, we're going to add a new action, which is the one that we originally said we wanted you to add, called consignment invoice entry. And then you're going to click done. When you click done, it's going to follow the same path as your traditional inventory does. It's going to go to inventory export. Those who are using QuickBooks, it'll be part of your X inventory new area that you're going to export. If you're not using QuickBooks and you're just exporting your files to Excel, it'll be in the same file name, and you will be able to see those inventory items there that you just basically received in your system and you bought and paid for. If it's fully, then of course, if you know there's only 2 items on your purchase order and they both have been used, there's no reason to use the selection tool unless there are remnants. Again, if there are remnants, use the selection tool to select those original slabs. And you can do that by slipping over to the remnant column and using the filter there and selecting false, because we're not interested in remnants, which should just then leave behind those 2 that you want to pay for. Select those 2 and follow the same steps as in the previous cell. Add the consignment invoice entry action manually, and then that'll be ready to be exported to QuickBooks or an Excel file. There is 3 exceptions that I can think of that basically force you to intervene manually. And that is if your policy or your agreement on the consignment inventory is when you get down to the last 2 slabs in the bundle, you're required to pay for them regardless if you've used them or not. So you will manually change the inventory item status for each of those 2 serial numbers, for instance, to available. As soon as you do that, you in essence have told the system that you're now ready to pay for them. So used and installed are the two primary statuses, but if you manually set it to available, it will also add them onto the consignment slabs to pay for report. And then you would request an invoice from your vendor and process the payment using one of the methods we talked about earlier, in this case, partially paid. You break a slab, therefore you can't use it, but you have to pay for it. So manually change the inventory status of that item to discarded, which will do the same thing as available. It'll add it to the consigned slabs to pay for report, and you follow the steps to go ahead and pay for that slab that unfortunately was broken in your shop. Consignment slab is returned. If you're returning inventory to the vendor, then you are going to manually change the inventory status to returned. Typically, you start off with pending return. When it is physically picked up, you change it to returned. You're going to open the inventory PO, select the item number, and you're going to scoot way down to the bottom in your item action detail and use the checkbox to the left of the word history. You're going to void the action that set the status to consign. And in this case, you're not going to process a vendor invoice because there are no invoice to enter into the system here. So there's nothing to process. Action flow will not let you enter an invoice value of 0. So this is the only way that you can manage this and change that around and make it so that you don't have to pay for it. Okay, Josiah, I'm going to just stop here and see if there's any burning questions, as you would put it, something that people are asking about or knowing about this presentation. I'll make sure that it's PDFable and sent back to you, Josiah, so you can distribute it if you like.
Great. Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking at the chat. If there's anything there, or if anyone wants to be brave enough to unmute themselves and ask a question, you're welcome to do so.
Roderick, can you just go back to the checkbox that you recommended people put in there? Just kind of show them where they would look for that and the purpose again of that. Just, I think that's a good thing to keep in mind.
Right. So in the configurations, I went to inventory PO and I added consignment and added a custom checkbox. Okay. So now when I'm actually in my inventory PO and I'm looking at that, if this was a one where we had consignment here, you'll see in the details section here, this is the little checkbox you would trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And again, not all customers have their users able to look at reports, or they don't have access directly to the inventory PO module, but they do have access to grid view. So the fact that I'm using this, again, if I wanted to, I wouldn't have to do that. I could look at all my inventory here. So if I looked at, for instance, all my purchase orders, I just retrieved all my POs, for instance, then I can come over to here and I can select true. Not all users particularly want to, or, use the save views if they're not there. They just look at their inventory POs, filter on true, and now they can look and see exactly what purchase orders are outstanding that they have in their system that are consignment. This is not the same as looking at items. If you look at your items in the system here, you can see you can build a grid view called inventory consign. This here will flip this open here, and basically I'm just using my status here to look at my consigned inventory. I can see exactly what's tagged to jobs. I can see who I bought it from, what the purchase order number is, and what my value is. So this would give me my total value today, in this case, roughly $36,000 worth of consignment inventory that I've got on hand. I haven't paid for it yet, but I have it on hand in my system here.
Thanks. I think that's a pro tip there.
Okay.
All right.
Anything else? Okay, we got a lot of robots in here. So again, like you say, the chat robots really don't have any input or feedback. So
Hard to keep up a conversation with those note takers.
We'll just do it with the four of us here, the four visuals. Okay, I'd like to thank Kim, who helped me work through. Again, I thought about designing the process a little bit different from the current documents that are already published. And so I bounced it off of Kim and we worked together on this. And so Kim, thanks for helping me out with this.
No problem. Thanks, Roderick.
Very cool. Well, thank you, Roderick, and thank you all for coming.
Oh, there's
Ruben,
a
did you
hand.
have a question?
Ruben's got a question.
Hey, I might have missed this, but if somehow you have to change consignment, like you did all the steps, but then realized slabs weren't consignment, can you unwind it and put them in normal?
You would have to go to the item numbers themselves, go down into the actions of that particular item at the very bottom of inventory PO, check the history checkbox, and then you're going to void the line where the status was consigned. Again, action flow listens to all decisions and all statuses in the order that they were added. So if you had consignment and then you found out, oops, that was a mistake, it should have been just straight available. In other words, this item was never consignment. You have to delete that status called consigned and then manually change it to available so that you're looking at that.
Cool.
Okay. That's sort of the manual intervention, if you will, but this sounds like the intervention needed to happen right at the onset rather than after the fact. In other words, you realize right at that moment in time that you selected the wrong decision.
Hard to imagine anyone here making that mistake. Mistakes to be made.
Right.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thank you, Roderick, and
Thanks for
thank
the
you
opportunity.
all. I will be sending this out, and Roderick, I think we'll have the PDFs that go with it, so you can follow along and just immerse yourself in the world of consigned inventory.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Thanks.
All right.
All right, bye.